Hello, my name is Michael Sokolow, and due to some technical issues I experienced yesterday, I'm not publishing my video on the initially planned date of January 22nd, which is a Tuesday, which will be the normal date for me for submitting videos in the future for this channel. But we'll just pretend that today is the 22nd of January, because I'm going to be doing the first installment in my series entitled This Day in History. Which will be a series I'll produce regarding an interesting event that occurred on the day that I publish each video, each Tuesday of the week. And the topic that I chose for this discussion is the Battle of Isandlwana, which was the first engagement of the Anglo-Zulu War, which was a 6-month war that occurred in 1879 between the British and the Zulu Kingdom, which was centered in southern South Africa, modern South Africa. The actual state didn't exist at the time, of course. And this battle was interesting in that it was actually a resounding victory for the Zulu, despite their technological disadvantage relative to the British. And this was actually arguably the most severe defeat that the British ever suffered at the hands of a native force with inferior technology, although certainly not inferior numbers, as I'll discuss later. So I'd like to first discuss a little bit about the background of this battle. The Anglo-Zulu War occurred due to an ultimatum set forth to King Cetshwayo, the king of the Zulu at the time, by a British man by the name of Frere, who was working for the British government, but was not exactly working within the orders set forth to him by his superiors, and he sent this ultimatum to the Zulu, a really ridiculous ultimatum, had some ridiculous requirements of the Zulu, saying that they should forfeit some of their warriors on supposed crimes they committed, and other ridiculous fines that they should pay, and about 500 heads of cattle for minor offenses. Things that were intended to be things that Cetshwayo could not respond to. It was really just an attempt to instigate a war that the British had not officially intended to become a part of. But Frere decided on his own initiative to do so, and this was in early December, and when the ultimatum was not met by January 1st, approximately, that was when the last measures had to be met, the war could begin. It did not begin until later, until the 22nd, really, and which was the first major engagement at Isandlwana. And so I think I'll just discuss a little bit about the weaponry used by each side, just to give you an idea of how this battle was fought. The Zulu warrior at this time would have had a couple of different weapons at his disposal. His primary weapon would have been the assegai spear, which was a ranged weapon. It would have been hurled like a javelin, and it was about 3 feet long in terms of its wooden shaft, and it had about a 1 foot long iron head at the top, a wide spear tip. And this was used throughout Africa at the time. Actually, been used for hundreds of years. It wasn't unique to the Zulu in any way. But what was unique to them was the ikwa, which was a melee weapon for short quarters, similar to like a sword in terms of utility, as a comparison. But it was introduced to the Zulu by their great leader Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century, in the 1820s, to revolutionize them as a fighting force. And this was also a spear. Although it was a bit shorter, the shaft was about 2 feet long. Although it had the same 1 foot long spearhead. However, this was a much wider spearhead, such that when you would penetrate an enemy with it, and then twist and pull out, it would supposedly make the sound ikwa, according to the Zulu at least. and it would create a great deal of damage and bleeding. It was very hard to stop the bleeding caused by such a wound. In addition, the Zulu warrior was also equipped with a cowhide shield, and this cowhide shield would have a shaft in the middle, known as an mbogo, which would extend its length to about 2.5 to 3 feet. And the advantage of the mbogo was that it allowed the Zulu warrior to plant his shield into the ground while fighting instead of holding onto it as you would with a typical European shield. That would impede fighting, because one would have to use one hand to use the shield and one hand to fight with the sword. In this case, the Zulu warrior could plant the shield in front of himself and then fight with both hands. He could use a knob carry, which is a small club-like object, on one hand, and his assegai spear or the ikula on the other, which greatly improved his ability to fight while protecting himself with the cowhide shield, which could protect certainly against other spears and also against firearms if they were fired at a long distance, not so much at short range. The Zulu also had a few firearms. They had a few old muskets, which were very out of date even at this time. They're in the late 19th century. And they had a few rifles. They were primarily smoothbore, nothing very accurate. And the Zulu also were not very well trained in their use. And part of the reason why they didn't really incorporate firearms into their battle strategy was the Zulu culture, which really frowned upon their use. It was seen as cowardly to use a firearm because an inexperienced warrior could take out a great warrior, a hero, with a firearm from range without ever having to meet him in hand-to-hand combat, and that was really not in keeping with the Zulu culture of the time. Although they did have a few firearms, but they really were not decisive in the battle. And as for the British did have firearms, of course. They had state-of-the-art Martini Henry breech-loading rifles. These breech-loading rifles were really revolutionary for the time, in that they allowed for a approximately 12 round per minute fire rate. And these were issued to pretty much all of the British regulars at the battle. And their effective range is about 400 yards, which was plenty for this engagement, really, in terms of how it played out. The range was not really a factor. Although the fire rate was excellent for the time. As I'll discuss later, what they really needed was ammunition. You can fire 12 rounds per minute, but if you run out of ammunition, or it's not effectively distributed, then that's not really significant. You'll eventually have to start fighting with your bayonet if you don't have ammunition. And then unfortunately, that's what happened for the British. In addition, they also had a couple 7-pounder artillery pieces, which were quickly taken out by the Zulus. They were overrun. And in addition to that, some of the natives had more traditional weaponry, because the British were low on other firearms. They had actually a few muskets, older rifles that were not breech loading, that would have been pretty ineffective in the hands of native auxiliary troops. And because of that, it turned out that many of them actually fled during the course of the battle, simply because it just appeared hopeless to them to be fighting with these antiquated weapons against a far numerically superior native group. In terms of numbers, the British had approximately 1,800 troops. That included the naval force and the British regulars. And the natives the Zulu had about 15 to 20,000 warriors, and not even all of those ended up being engaged in the fight, but they were plenty enough, it turned out. The main problem that the Zulu, or rather that the British encountered in this battle, was a lack of appropriate strategy. And that really began at the first sighting of the Zulu at about 8 a.m. on the 22nd. when some scouts came across the Zulu, all in formation, silent, seated, all 20,000 of them. I just happened to be looking for a few parties of them and came across all of them. And the Zulu proceeded to attack immediately, just to capitalize on the surprise while they still had it. And certainly the British were in a tough position at this time, but they made it worse by not really doing anything. They sent some messengers back to their camp, and the presiding officer, Lord Chelmsford, just ignored their pleas for help. He was really more interested in just waiting for the Zulu to come to his camp, see what happens. Their pleas became more and more frantic, but he really didn't do anything until the last minute, until they finally came upon the camp, and then suddenly it's their fault. It's Durnford's fault. It's the lieutenant colonel's fault for not preparing the appropriate defenses, which he called for, which he had no way to create himself while he was out retreating from the Zulu and just fighting back as much as he could with the little few forces that he had. And then when it came to actually creating a perimeter around their fort that they had created about a week earlier, they began with really very scanty defenses at the beginning. They had about a week to form a logger, which would have been a very typical maneuver of the time to use their wagon train as a defense of the camp, and that's just typical military procedure in 19th century in a colonial setting, in a foreign land, in Africa in particular, in the arid setting. But Chelmsford decided that would just take too long, so he decided not to do it. So they didn't have any defenses. So when it came time for 10 to 20,000 Zulu warriors to attack the camp, they went further in their ineptitude and created a perimeter of troops in an appropriate manner for the time, given their technological superiority, given their fantastic weaponry at the time, at least the Martini Henrys with fantastic firing rate. If it had been appropriately established, that perimeter, they would have been able to take out many Zulu warriors, despite their prowess in hand-to-hand combat. If they can be taken out from afar, it's very possible that the British could have achieved a victory. However, their fatal flaw was that the British failed to failed to concentrate their troops, and because of this, if for instance a certain, say, a 5-troop grouping of them was taken out, that would leave a gaping hole in the perimeter that wouldn't have been there if they had actually established a concentrated perimeter. And because of this, Durnford's right flank, rather, when it was attacked, it quickly crumbled, simply because they weren't concentrated enough, and that entire company was then assaulted by the Zulu, who had formed their typical bullhorn formation, with veterans in the center as a chest, and the younger warriors acting as what they call the horns, and running around the British to flank them. And in doing so, they lost one of their 6 companies very quickly. And then another officer, Pauline, who had almost no experience in combat, retreated appropriately. But he was hopeless a bit beyond that, just a simple decision to retreat. And in doing so, he lost another company, his left flank, at which point his flanks were entirely exposed. And really, at that point, you can't blame Pauline for failing to achieve victory. He didn't really do anything wrong at that point, but he was quickly overrun. Approximately 1,300 of the 1,800 total British and British auxiliaries were slaughtered at this battle, whereas the Zulu lost 300 or 400. troops in total out of their 10 to 20,000 that they began with. Really not significant number. And really, the repercussions of this, however, were ironic, and such Wyo recognizes actually immediately that this humiliating defeat for the British would actually cause the British to, the British government at least, to double its efforts to take down the Zulu kingdom, because they had been embarrassed throughout the world. The British Empire had been stopped by a native force with spears. Despite by having the most advanced weaponry of the time. And in addition to this, we on the same day, a few other British troops, so about 150 of them actually only, managed to fight off another Zulu force of about 3,000 to 4,000 at Rorke's Drift, which some of you may be familiar with. It's featured in a few Hollywood movies back in the 60s and 70s. I think one in the 90s as well. I'm not sure. Haven't seen it. Here it's pretty good, by the way. You might want to check that out if you're interested in this video in Anglo-Zulu history. But back to what I was saying. The British actually managed to fend off those 3,000 to 4,000 troops, and 11 or 12 of them earned Victorious Crosses for their valor. Later after Isandlwana. And because of this, the combination of the embarrassment and the valor of the British troops, the British government really redoubled their efforts to take out the Zulu. And when they sent more troops, they sent about 10, 15, 20,000 British troops, well equipped, with artillery. The Zulu really didn't have a chance. The war ended in June of that year. It lasted for less than 6 months after the British really committed troops to the effort. I think, oh yes, I was going to mention, actually I didn't mention before, that I had just been talking about the valor of the British troops. It's just an interesting thing to note. Near the end of the Battle of Isandlwana, when it was clear that the British couldn't win, many of them had horses at the time. They had access, at least, to horses that could have allowed them to flee from the battlefield. And yet they chose not to. They chose to, for the most part, to stay and fight, even if they ran out of ammunition, which was poorly distributed by their inept officers. They fought with bayonets and rifle butts, and they weren't very successful against the well-trained Zulu. But that's one of the more miraculous and encouraging. I don't know what to say, encouraging, but fascinating aspects of the battle. That despite the inept leadership that the British had to endure, the regulars were just incredibly courageous. I can't say enough about them. And for that reason, I think in the future, if I can, I'll probably be talking more about the British military in future installments of this series, This Day in History. So check back if you're interested in British history. I'll probably be focusing on some engagements, maybe some that the British were more successful in. Particularly interested in 100 Years' War. Hopefully, Battle of Crécy comes up, Battle of Agincourt. Maybe that's on one of my days. We'll see. I'm not sure when that date was. But I hope you enjoyed my video. And thank you for watching it. And I hope you enjoy the videos that you'll see in the rest of the week on this channel. Thank you.